Hello, and welcome back to April's Cozy Corner. Today, we're talking about a woman whose journey wasn't just about success, but about becoming over and over again. When people think of Michelle Obama, they think of grace, intelligence, strength, but what they don't see is the process, the uncertainty, the pressure, the quiet moments of doubt, because becoming isn't a straight line. Michelle Obama was born on January 17, 1964, on the south side of Chicago, not in luxury, not surrounded by endless opportunity, but in a small apartment with a family that believed deeply in discipline, education, and dignity. Her father worked at a city water plant. Despite living with multiple sclerosis, her mother stayed present, steady, and intentional. There was no room for excuses, but there was always room for growth. And that's where becoming began. She was a high achiever early on, Princeton University, then Harvard Law School. On paper, she was doing everything right. But even then, she questioned whether she truly belonged. She once spoke about feeling like an outsider, like she had to prove herself constantly. And that's something people don't talk about enough. Becoming often looks like success on the outside while feeling like uncertainty on the inside. After graduating, she entered corporate law, a prestigious path, a respected title, but something felt off. Not wrong, just not aligned. And this is where her story becomes deeper than a biography. Because she didn't just chase achievement, she started listening to herself. Sometimes the life that looks right on paper isn't the life that feels right in spirit. And becoming requires the courage to know the difference. She eventually left corporate law and transitioned into public service, working with communities, mentoring, creating impact that felt real and human. It wasn't the most glamorous move, but it was honest. And becoming has always required honesty. Then came another shift. She met Barack Obama at a law firm where she was actually his mentor. Their relationship wasn't rushed. It grew through conversation, respect, and shared values. But even love became part of her becoming. Marriage, motherhood, career shifts, all while trying to hold onto her own identity. When Barack entered politics, her life changed again, and not always in ways that felt comfortable. She's spoken openly about the strain, the pressure, the sacrifice, because becoming isn't always soft. Sometimes it stretches you into versions of yourself you didn't plan for. There are seasons in life where you don't recognize yourself anymore. But that doesn't mean you're lost. It might mean you're in the middle of becoming. Then, in 2008, everything shifted on a global scale. She became the First Lady of the United States, the first Black First Lady. And with that came visibility, scrutiny, expectation. People watched everything: what she wore, how she spoke, how she moved. But what stood out the most was how she remained grounded. She didn't try to become someone else to fit the role. She brought herself into it, advocating for healthy families, supporting military communities, encouraging education. Especially for young girls, she showed that influence doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. Real power isn't always about position. Sometimes it's about presence, about showing up as yourself, even when the world is watching. But even after the White House, her becoming didn't stop. Because becoming doesn't end when the title is done. If anything, that's when it becomes the most personal. Because when the world stops defining you, you have to decide who you are on your own. And that kind of becoming is quieter, less visible, less applauded. But just as important, she stepped away from one of the most visible roles in the world and entered a season that many people don't talk about enough. A season of rediscovery, of asking yourself, who am I without the title, the expectations, without the version of me that everyone else has learned to recognize? And that question can feel uncomfortable because for so long, your identity can become tied to what you do, to how people see you, to what you've achieved. But becoming has a way of gently pulling you back to yourself. There comes a moment when you have to meet yourself again, not the version shaped by pressure or expectation, but the version of you that exists underneath it all. And for Michelle Obama, that meant creating in a different way, speaking in her own voice, sharing her story on her terms, not as First Lady, not as a symbol, but as a woman who has lived through many versions of herself and chose to keep evolving anyway. Because that's the part of becoming that isn't always easy. Letting go of who you used to be, even when the version of you was successful. Even when that version of you was admired. Even when that version of you made sense to everyone else. But becoming was never about making sense to everyone. It was about being honest with yourself. Becoming isn't about becoming someone else. It's about returning to who you've always been, layer by layer, choice by choice, until your life feels like your own. And maybe that's the real lesson, not the titles, not the recognition, but the quiet courage to choose yourself again and again. This has been April's Cozy Corner, a space for reflection, growth, and becoming. Thank you for joining me today.